Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. I am Dan Allen and I am joined by Ellen Thomas, who is
Dan.
One of our new co-hosts on the Young Film Academy
very
podcast.
Happy to be here and one episode to be here for.
It's very exciting. Do you want to tell us about who our guest is today?
Yes, I would love to. So our guest today is Anna Smith, who is a film critic and film journalist. She is fantastic and she knows lots of stuff. She is the former president of the UK Critic Circle. She has her own podcast called Girls on Film, which she is the host of. She has interviewed major actors and directors on screen, on stage and in print. She's a regular film critic for BBC, Sky, Time Out, The Guardian, Empire, and much more. She's hosted Q&As with the likes of Julianne Moore and Louis Theroux and Vanessa Hudgens. So she has done a lot.
I am tremendously excited.
Yes.
So, without any further ado, welcome to the podcast. Anna, how's it going?
It's going very well. How are you?
We're very good, aren't we, Ellen?
Yeah, we're very excited to have you on the podcast.
Absolutely. And it seems like, you are across platforms, across media forms, I would say, with the many pieces of the pie or different pies. How do you explain what you do to friends and family is what I want to know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I say I'm a film critic and broadcaster and host of the podcast Girls on Film. But I think what a lot of people actually don't realise when you immediately say film critic is that I'm a journalist first and foremost. So that's probably worth something that's worth following up with, because I trained as a journalist and I got into film as a specialism some years after working in the industry. So I'm a journalist first and foremost who specialised in film, and then discovered that was what I wanted to devote the rest of my working life to.
Gotcha. What were the different topics that you got to write about before becoming a film critic? Because I've read loads about your film work, but not so much about your world before that.
Surprisingly random things. I was the editor for a short while of something called Navigation News, which is like a corporate thing, and obviously something that isn't particularly my area of interest. If you know me, you'll know I have no sense of direction, so it's sort of quite funny. But it was a great...
I don't know if it was for like sat-navs or something.
It was a great stepping stone, just a great experience editing a magazine, obviously. And then I worked in dance music magazines, underground dance music magazines. That was fun, but absolutely chaotic and stressful because we were always underfunded and understaffed. And everyone we were dealing with was quite disorganised in many ways, so it was quite interesting. And then I was in women's magazines, which is actually where I found my love of writing about film and decided to specialise in that.
Lovely, that's really cool. So with the when you started writing about film, was it just all genres? Was it TV as well? Or was it particularly to do with women's role within film that you were focusing on? Like, what was the angle from that magazine?
When I started writing the film reviews at Minx magazine, which is where I was working at the time, I guess we were looking for things that might appeal to women in particular, but we were quite a modern women's magazine. We weren't sort of focusing on things that people might perceive as stereotypically girly or anything like that. So I remember The Matrix being one of the first ones I reviewed. So that was a pretty good start.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking, I quite like this way of earning a living. I go and watch this movie, I get a glass of wine, I get to write about my opinion afterwards. I think I could get used to this. So yeah, I wrote about anything and everything. And then when I went freelance, I actually started... I did have to do some jobs which weren't sort of my goal initially. So I was doing some things like sub-editing shifts. I was a production editor for Empire magazine on their special editions like action, horror, that kind of thing. And from there on in, I got to meet the commissioning editors, and then they knew me and they commissioned me to write. I think I wrote some film book reviews before they let me do film reviews. It was quite hard to crack into. You had to really prove yourself, and you had to really... get to know people. And in Time Out, I actually started in the TV section, which is actually a very similar discipline, obviously. And that was a time when It was quite a big section, and we would just sit in the office all day watching TV. It's quite an interesting way to earn a living as well.
Sounds like a dream.
But then the film section at Time Out suddenly went, okay, we'll give you a go, and then it all went from there. I could specialise really.
I was going to say, how did you find that the female perspective or the feminist perspective? How did you find your way to that? I know you mentioned that you did work at a women's magazine.
Well, I think it predates that actually for me, because I read English at Leeds University, and there was
so did I.
Course. Did you? Oh,
yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Good stuff. Great place, huh?
Yeah, amazing. So much fun.
Loved going to Leeds. And as you know, very good for English. And they had a course called Gender and Popular Culture. It was an option that you can option into. And I obviously thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And I remember we were reviewing and discussing and analysing films as diverse as Thelma and Louise and Basic Instinct from a feminist perspective. And I think that really did sow some seeds for me back then in what I wanted to specialise in. And I was always considered myself a feminist, and I was sort of figuring all that sort of stuff out as I got older. So when I had the opportunity to choose a bit more in terms of what I would specialise in, then this was an obvious choice for me. And when we launched Girls on Film podcast, that was the perfect time to do it, because Time's Up had just happened.
Yes.
And the Me Too movement. And there were some shocking statistics about women directors, about women film critics like myself. So it was sort of twofold. It was to shine a light on the women making great films, and some men making great films about women as well, just talking about representation on screen, but also to give a platform for other female film critics like myself. Because I was finding by that stage I was getting on TV and radio quite a lot and broadcasting, but I was one of the few women being asked to do that. So we wanted to go, look, we don't want to be pitted against each other. We're all in this together. And, women talking to women about film shouldn't be a niche thing or an unusual thing. It should be as normal as two men talking about film, which at that time was obviously much more prevalent.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes I find I don't want to watch a film as a feminist, or sometimes I do, and sometimes I just can't help it. So do you find you're always watching films with this perspective or interacting with that perspective? Do you ever switch that lens off?
I mean, I could definitely appreciate a guilty pleasure and know that it's not a feminist triumph. I think if you lose your sense of humour about these things, that's pretty disastrous. But I do always have those two sections of my brain working, the enjoyment factor. I think as a critic, you have to, you've kind of got the enjoyment factor and what am I thinking about this as a punter? And then you've got the more analytical side working at the same time. And for me, that analytical side is often going to the place of not just, is this a good, accomplished film, but how does it stand up? Is it doing anything differently, or is it regressing us? And if young boys and girls were watching this, would it give them negative gender stereotypes that we should be concerned about, and should that be picked up in the review and all that kind of thing? So I think naturally it's always there.
Yeah, and I think it's really important when you're a film critic and you're understanding that films play a certain role in how people perceive the world and perceive people around them. So I guess in simple terms, what do you agree? What do you see as the role or purpose of being a film critic and a film journalist?
I think there are several purposes, and it does and it can vary depending on who you're writing for at the time. As a freelancer that could be writing for 12 different publications at any one time, I might put my brain in a different space for different publications, like, as diverse as Heat or Sight and Sound, for example. So for me, with the exception of Sight and Sound, because that's more academic, I would normally be thinking, well, the reader, on a basic level, the reader wants to know whether they're going to go and see this film, whether they want to see this film, whether they would like this film, whether they should spend their hard-earned cash on going to see it or wait for it to come on streaming or whatever. But on the other side, you obviously want to write something educational, entertaining, whether or not they're going to go and see it, just something that they will find inspiring or amusing, or helpful in some way, memorable. And also I do think, as well as my duty to my editors, which is obviously paramount, there's the duty to the filmmakers to do right by them. I'm not a fan of dismissive, reviews that dig the knife in. Yeah. I mean, when I was starting out, there's probably a few that I could pick out and say, I wouldn't write that now, because I think the more filmmakers that you get to know and that you get to interview and you get to be friends with, and the more just, more kind of you understand about the world, I think the more, certainly in my case, that I've understood how important it is to be incredibly fair about these films and to resist the temptation to dig the knife in for comedic effect. Even if it is a bad film, if it's like a small British bad film, they're probably going to read it. So just remember that,
Yeah, and I think people have an impression sometimes, or I certainly did, when I hear the word critic, you think this is sort of an enemy to the filmmaker or in some way, or they're going to be saying things that aren't nice. But where do you think, like, being a filmmaker sits within the industry? Like, what other roles and parts of the industry do you interact with, and what is important in those relationships?
Well, I mean, I used to be the president of the CRITIC Circle here in the UK, and our awards are just a wonderful example of critics celebrating film and saying, yes, we love this. This is what we loved. And we often do have a consensus about these things. So I think you're right. A number of actors and filmmakers who come to those events are a bit nervous, or they're making jokes about critics, digging the knife in, because it must be absolutely daunting. I mean, I wouldn't like to be the subject of criticism. I get it.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to have a symbiotic relationship with filmmakers. For me. Not just in interviewing them, but as I say, understanding the world they're coming from, understanding what goes into the incredibly hard work that they do. The more producers I interview, because I don't just interview them for Girls on Film, I interview them on stage. I host Q&As after screenings and things, and for BAFTA. And it's really interesting talking to producers and seeing, like, as you both know, like the time, the many years of slog that can go into a film, and it may or may not get made. Absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
I would not have that patience. So absolutely hats off to filmmakers. So I think, I think, and with Girls on Film, it's been a really nice chance to actually support filmmakers, because we're not really there. We've had a few episodes where we get a bit critical, but generally we're there to support and champion great work and to be celebratory and to say that this is where we should be going, and bravo you for getting it right,
Yeah. With
just to further that collaboration. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, I was just going to say, like, obviously talking about like Girls on Film as a platform, and then also the different platforms that you've spoken about. And I know obviously in this sort of post-Me Too world, how much of film reviewing and film it feels weird to say film criticism, because then it suddenly inherently almost sounds negative, but your job as a film critic, how much of it is about judging the quality of the film versus holding the filmmakers to account? Do you know what I mean, in terms of, are they doing the right things, and does that depend on the platform that you're writing for or speaking on behalf of?
It does depend, but I think you're absolutely right. I think there can be times where sometimes we hold the people that are trying to do the right thing more to account than the people that just don't care. Because if you see something and it feels like, it could almost be a feminist classic, but they really dropped the ball in this regard, then you think, well, at least they're trying, So I often have this sort of internal dialogue with myself about that, and I think it's just what has really been interesting in the last few years is the training for unconscious bias that we've been seeing. The British Independent Film Awards do it for voters, of which I'm one. BAFTA do it. We did it at the Critic Circle, and I think, as a critic, constantly checking your own unconscious bias is really important. And that could include what you were just sort of referring to there. I think sometimes, am I holding the right person to account here? And is this the right format? Is this the right place to be asking those questions? Yes, I care about representation on screen, but does this particular publication's reader care? And is this the place to be pulling them up on it? I certainly... I hope I don't have a reputation sort of, constantly being sort of PC police, but Girls on Film is somewhere where we can be honest about that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about this as well, because it's like that balance between having a engaged conversation about a film and then also perhaps just being like, I actually don't want anything to do with that film. And because Poor Things came out last year, and I had a lot of conversations with friends about how the film portrayed women, and we disagreed on whether it was a feminist film and whether that matters and whether we should take that as an important part of consideration. And I remember saying at the time, this is why I love film, because everyone's so engaged and passionate about a certain story and what it means to them. But sometimes that experience can be difficult or confusing. I've had films that have been ruined for me as I've become an adult and had a sort of more feminist lens on them, and I'm what do I do with this film now? So I guess how do you manage that balance of criticism liberating you versus making you draw away from a film or filmmaker? How do you know when to take it really seriously or not too seriously? I know you mentioned earlier having humour in these situations, or can you give an example of a film you've had that with?
I think it's an absolute case by case basis. I think we once did a musical special on stage, and a chap in the audience sort of asked, why are you picking on Seven Brides for Seven Brothers? Because, of course, if you know anything about that film, you'll know it is very, very problematic, even though it's one of my favourite childhood films. And I think I can hold both those things at once. But I also think it is important and useful to interrogate those things just so we can see what's changed and where we're going right, and how to avoid falling into the traps of the past, or indeed sometimes of the present movies. So I think you can be quite objective about it and just say, look, this it doesn't mean that I'm not a big fan of cancel culture. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be watching this film, but it's important to be aware of it and think about how we recommend it and who we recommend it to and in what context.
And also what we can learn from looking at those things for the future as well. Exactly.
What sometimes I think it's again, you can be quite positive about it. You think, well, you'd never get away with saying that now. Well, isn't that good? Doesn't that show how far we have come? And even as you say yourself, even things that you enjoyed when you were younger, you realise that your own mind and the culture you're in has moved on to the point where that's now unacceptable. And that's really interesting. And I think for me, a lot of when I go on certain news channels and they use the word woke, and they talk about woke culture in a sort of damning way. But to me, I think it's more about empathy. And I think the good thing about what people might call woke culture is that we are being encouraged to think more about how our words and our films, our entertainment affect people, and how it might upset someone or make them feel targeted or set a bad example. And I think it is a positive thing in general if you approach it the right way.
Oh yeah, there's a whole. I mean, as you're saying, woke is generally a term. It's really created by the enemy of woke, if you know what I mean. It's really the other side that have created this monster thing that they throw everything into woke so that they can demonify it. But as you're saying, very often at the heart of every single one of these things is just an effort to reach a point of kindness and consideration and empathy. How do you balance that? Do you ever think of, oh, maybe I don't want to write this, or I don't want to sort of go down that road with a particular article or a particular topic out of fear of inciting the brainless mob, or does it get to the point where you're just like, okay, no, I do need to do this in order to combat the mob? Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like a weird place that I think a lot of people find themselves in.
Yeah, I do know what you mean, because if I go on certain big news channels on TV, you can get quite a lot of feedback on what is now known as X.
Interesting.
And sometimes, unfortunately, it will attract, the biggest trolls and the most extreme people. What I'm finding now is increasingly is that the presenters and the producers are very keen for me to be extremely honest about how I feel. They're not trying to set me up. They genuinely like, yes, we care about how many women directors are in contention this year or whatever the subject is. But then you do get some audience members throwing that kind of lazy woke word around. But it's about knowing your audience, but also not being afraid to state your opinion. So again, it's really about balance. A lot of what we're talking about now, isn't it? It is about balance, and I think for a film critic to be balanced in lots of different ways is so important for me. The way I like to do it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any tips on like harnessing that balance?
Well, experience is a wonderful thing, I think, and also. We're talking about empathy, but putting yourself in other people's positions actually is a really big part of my job, I think. Yeah. Because I'm not just thinking, as I said, everything I've said, I'm thinking of the filmmakers, I'm thinking of the readers. And when you're writing engaging copy, whatever kind of journalism you're doing, you're hopefully thinking about the person reading it and what will keep them interested and excite them or enrage them, whatever you're trying to do. So I think it's all part and parcel, really. So it's just never rest on your laurels and think you know everything either, because you don't.
Yeah. Speaking of tips, I wondered. I mean, you probably have as much or more way more experience interviewing people than we do. We wondered what are the tips? What makes a really good interviewer? How do you conduct a conversation as expertly as possible?
You're asking for a friend, Dan.
I'm asking for the audience.
I think you're both terrific, by the way.
I honestly wasn't looking for. I wasn't fishing for compliments. We're here to educate the next generation of potential critics and interviewers.
Yes, exactly. So I would say loosening up your interviewee is always helpful if you've got the time to do that. Yeah. It depends what you're doing. If you're in a junket situation, if there is anyone listening that wants to be an interviewer who will be going to junkets, trying to lead with a question that they haven't heard 500 times before that day is useful. Now, I haven't always had that privilege because sometimes I was doing like 5-minute film junkets and my editors would say, this is what you need to ask.
Could you just define junket just for our listeners that might not know what they are?
That's very industry insider of me. I apologise.
No, not at all.
A film junket would be a press junket for a film. So, for example, when Wicked recently came out, I went to the Corinthia Hotel in London, had to get a special pass, and there's about 7, maybe to 10 different rooms, depending on the size of the junket, with what they call talents. So whether it's the cinematographer, the director, the stars, sitting in these, it's sort of like speed dating. They sit in these rooms and they have conversations with different journalists it's very cleverly coordinated by the publicists, and everyone has a certain amount of time, and you go in and out, you ask your questions. So
how long do you normally get for something like that?
Girls on Film are really lucky. We probably get 25 minutes.
Oh, amazing!
Sometimes more. Most broadcasts get about 5 minutes. Sometimes they get 2 minutes. It's like it can be that tiny. So you have not got a chance to get nuance then at all. But for me, obviously, with Girls on Film, we're really lucky. And often the name of the podcast in itself interests people, and they'll ask something about it, and then you can engage with them quite nicely. And any actress generally will have listened to it because we're very popular in the industry, so they kind of love us, which is great. I don't want to say all of them. There might be one listening who doesn't, but anyone I've met seems to really appreciate it. So then you've got that on your side. But in junkets, I think. Generally, if they're nice people, they will be looking to give you an interesting interview. But if you constantly go in with so where did the idea for this film come from? They will have been asked that, 10, 20, 30 times already that day, unless you're the very first one of the day. Yeah. And we all know how hard it is to repeat yourself and sound interesting. So I think, you're helping each other. by trying to think of something a bit different, but that's still fresh and useful and interesting for the listener or the reader.
Yeah.
And do you research as much as possible, try and like watch people's films that they've been in? What kind of prep do you do?
Yes, of course. I mean, I'm generally in a position that I've seen the latest film, because that's what I'm talking to them about, and I will have seen all their previous work. But if I, just because I've been doing this for a long time, but if I need to go back and revisit things, I will. And podcasts are actually great. I would highly recommend listening to someone being interviewed on a podcast before you interview someone in person, or also on a YouTube interview. If I'm doing someone on stage, I will try to watch them in a Q&A format from another festival, which isn't always possible, but sometimes you can find them, and then you get a sense of how nervous they are. Because actually what may surprise people is, on that side, is how often very famous filmmakers and people can get nervous doing these things. So it's kind of your job, if you're doing them on stage especially, to make them feel comfortable, make them feel relaxed.
Yeah, because I think you can forget as the interviewer that someone else just as nervous as you, and you've got to help them through that and not be the nervous one.
Definitely. Confidence is everything. I think whether they're arrogant, which is occasionally the case, or whether they're just kind of confident and clever, or whether they're really nervous, it's good for you to show confidence, even if you're faking it, just because it's going to reassure someone nervous and make them feel they're in safe hands, or it's going to hopefully tackle the unconscious bias of that, older film director who looks at what was then a young blonde and goes, oh, she looks a bit, not too bright. She doesn't really know what she's talking about. If I had to overcompensate as a young woman for the judgment that people were putting on me, and any number of people might be judged for different reasons. But I had to go in with great confidence just to preempt any kind of concerns they might have based on my appearance, my age, or whatever.
Yeah, because it's not their profession, is it? Right? Like, they're directors are used to directing, although directors often have they're used to pitching, aren't they? So they're often in front of like strangers a lot, but actors often don't like being themselves, is what I hear from a lot of actors. It's why they enjoy embodying someone else. So then suddenly you're expecting a movie star, but actually what you get is someone that's not that comfortable sitting in a room and answering questions as them. Definitely.
And I think, what's really nice is when you can make a connection with someone and they're grateful afterwards and they give you a lovely interview and say, oh, thank you for making me feel relaxed, and I think that's such a nice thing to be able to do for people, especially if you've got an audience there, which I often do have. And you would be surprised at the level of people that, perhaps you wouldn't, but, very, very high level of people, A-listers that do get nervous sometimes. And a lot of actors really are quite shy. And they not, if I ask people to present awards, like at our Girls on Film Awards, or whether previously at the Critic Circle Awards, sometimes they'd be up for it, and sometimes actors are just like, oh, please don't make me go on stage and say something. I'm like, you're an actor, this is so weird. You perform on the stage in the theatre, but somehow, as you say, being themselves sometimes isn't always as easy. Again, they're faking confidence, right, aren't they, in some ways? Yeah. So
do you have any tips for faking confidence? Like, are any things that our sort of young listeners could do if they maybe got an interview, maybe they're trying to get into university, and they've got to present themselves and they're really not feeling confident? How do they create the illusion of confidence?
Well, manage your breathing is really important. Nice, slow breaths. Make sure you're not in a rush. Have lots of time to prepare and feel comfortable. I try to have, when in the past, I don't get nervous now, but in the past, when I was starting out, I would try to have a conversation with someone beforehand, whether it was just a person in the shop or the person doing my makeup for me to go on TV, with someone who is really upbeat and positive and nice to me. And of course, the women that do, sometimes men that do the makeup for you go on TV, that is part of their job, actually, I think, and it's really important to make people feel relaxed. So I would say, make sure you're surrounded by relaxing environment, nice people, things that make you feel social and upbeat. Make sure you're really comfortable in what you're wearing. You don't have anything else to be worrying about. And faking it, I'm in two minds, because I think sometimes when I started out, I was imagining I was someone famous who was more confident than I felt on that day. But another really important piece of advice is to not pretend to be someone you're not. Because, it's the oldest advice in the book, isn't it? But, yeah, being yourself is so important, and people are much more responsive to you when you're being yourself rather than trying to mimic somebody who you want to be like.
Yeah.
Do you have a hype song?
I don't. Do you?
I think I have a few, but I'm not going to share them.
That could be weaponized against you.
Yeah.
We'll ask you off air. Do you have any horror stories? I was wondering of. You don't have to name names of junkets that maybe didn't go as planned.
Yeah. So sometimes people are in a foul mood, and whatever you say, they will snap at you. And you're trying to be nice. You're trying to make trivial conversation, and there are definitely a few. Once again, older gentlemen, I have to say, guys that have just been doing it so long and they're just sick of it. You can tell it sometimes, and possibly underestimating young women as well. But yeah,
what's this film about? What do you think it's about?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, basically that sort of thing. Yeah, good impression. I hope that's not you when you're interviewing.
No, oh god, no.
What do you think? I've had some, and I had someone when I actually pulled him up on how rude he was being to me, actually, because he was being so rude, and then I wrote it up and I was honest about what happened in the room, and that was quite an interesting one.
Oh wow.
So because I just that there are points where you just think that no, that's just not acceptable to be that rude to somebody. But most of the time, I have to say, literally 99.9% of the time, everyone is lovely, and it's their job, to be nice. Obviously it's boring doing junkets, but thank you to all those nice filmmakers, which is the vast majority, who've sat there and listened to the same question again and again and done their very best to make it an engaging interview. It's a two-way street, and most of the time it's very successful.
Yeah. You've spoken about a lot of different things that you do. So from the podcast to like live interviews on stage, and also you've done some writing as well. How do you find like switching between the different mediums, and what are the major kind of differences between those?
I really enjoy doing all of them. I started out purely as print, and then started doing more and more broadcast, and I still have 3 regular film columns. I've got Rolling Stone UK, Waitrose Weekend, and Saga magazine. So again, it's great. I have to have my brain in very different space for all those different titles, which I enjoy. And yeah, I think that's one of the reasons I became freelance, is that I really enjoy juggling different things of different tones. Like today, I'm sitting with you doing a podcast, but obviously earlier I was doing some writing, and then I was having a meeting with the Girls on Film team talking about our awards, which are coming out, very exciting. So it's nice to be working in different media throughout the day, I would say.
And there's also
really
like
fun.
Within the different media, the different like audiences and the different angles you're going for, so there's a lot to think about.
Yes, I don't know, maybe it helps to be a Gemini or something, someone said, because I've got lots of different things going on in my head, like all the different personalities. I can switch into that person. But yeah, again, it goes back to the empathy, doesn't it? Like thinking, what does the Waitrose Weekend reader want to hear about this film on this occasion? What would the thing be of most interest for them?
How much of your voice, like obviously writing for those different platforms, because the magazines themselves have a voice, or they have a tone or an energy. So how do you adapt for the platform, and how much is it you that sort of like on display, if that makes sense? So how present or visible should the critic be in general, like between the different platforms?
I think that's a really fair question. I think the more you find your feed, the more, in my experience anyway, the more I am me, if you like, but just formatted and angled towards the publication in question. or the audience in question. When I started writing for Sight and Sound, they had pages of brief about house style. So some places you will have that, and it's quite specific. So you obviously get your own voice in there, but there's a lot about structure and all that kind of thing that you have to follow. I think generally, I would never write exactly the same review for two different people, though. I mean, obviously, I can't do that anyway because that would be plagiarizing myself. But it wouldn't be possible for me to do so because they all have a slightly different audience and a slightly different tone that's required, slightly different word count. That's the beauty of it as well. You know, it could be anything between 50 words to 1,000 words. You know, so obviously the word count is really going to slightly determine how deep you go.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the direction you go is very much about what does this particular audience want to know most about this film.
Yeah.
And how does it work? So you've done freelance and you've also been like working for organizations. How do you have more freedom when you're a freelancer? Does the magazine or publication, do they give you a certain angle or do you search for that angle? How does it differ? Yeah.
I mean, I've been freelance now for 24 years, so I absolutely love it, and I wouldn't go back to working in an office, touch wood. But I would say, in terms of freedom, I think I have gained more and more and more the more respected I've become, because I think when you're starting out and you're a young, hungry critic, you're doing more pitching in order to get the regular work. You're not just sort of given a regular column somewhere. You know, you have to really, work at it, work on your editors, convince them that you should be the person to write about this. And I also used to have a list that I sent out to everyone with every film that I'd seen, just to remind them that I exist, to let them know, see easy at a glance what I've seen, which I'm actually thinking of starting up again now for broadcast purposes, because I do a lot of, with producers and radio and TV. So I think in terms of what I choose to write about, though, now with the three places that I write for regularly, I very much collaborate with my editor, but they consider me the expert. They are not film people. They come to me and they say, "You're our film expert. What should we cover this week?" And then we'll have a discussion about it, and they'll have thoughts. But generally, I lead that, which is great actually, and that probably is why I tend to end up now writing more positive reviews, because I'm picking out the ones the readers really want to read about, rather than the sort of when I was a jobbing critic at Time Out and I got all the not very not very high budget films, let's say that. Someone once wrote into Time Out and said, "Is Anna Smith real, or are you making her up because she's just doing all these 1-star reviews?" And I was like, "No, I'm here, I exist. They're just giving me all the ones they don't want to do."
That's so fun. I can't imagine just like sitting down and like just time after time and getting those films.
It was an education.
I quite like, there's a whole world, isn't there, of like so bad it's good as almost like a genre, though, right? Like, or were you not getting those? Because there's also the so bad it's actually really bad, which is, I find, it's the ones where they're really bad but they're really slow. So whereas the so bad it's good ones generally have a bit of zip to them, so at least they're like moving quickly.
Different flavours of bad.
Yeah, exactly. I recently reviewed Craven the Hunter for Metro newspaper, and that's an example of quite bad but never boring, and so I don't mind those, and you're thinking of lots of fun things to say about it, and also it's big budget, so you don't feel too awful being honest about this, I mean, if something is incredibly dull, I always say, if that's the worst part of my job, I'm a lucky person, that's sort of, but in terms of getting the so bad it's good, I think it was the early 2000s when there was that I'm thinking of this period of Time Out. There were lots of really poor American comedies, I think, quite lowest common denominator. Again, kind of pre Time's Up. So some quite unpleasant, male-driven kind of comedies, which... And some of the female ones weren't too good either, to be honest, some of the rom-coms.
Is this like the American Pie sort of era?
Yeah, but not as good as American Pie. You're kind yeah. You can plumb the depths of Time Out and find out all the one stars and see my name by them. And
those are the films I was talking about earlier when I was like, they've been ruined for me now I'm older, because they were just the ones I grew up on.
Yeah. So I may well have given one star to something you absolutely loved back then, but who knows?
I was watching, was it Not Another Teen Movie recently?
Oh, yes.
Which, you know what, like, rewatching it, don't get me wrong, there's some stuff that you're like, absolutely can't do now, but some of the jokes landed way better than I thought they would. Like, you almost expect the whole film to be painted with sort of this modern brush, but actually, some of it works more than I thought it would.
That's interesting, because I definitely reviewed that one, and I haven't seen it since, so I would be interested. But yeah, that was the kind of thing I was getting a lot of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you, now you work freelance, I say now, it's been a while, but how do you find your ideas and stories and, like angles, I guess?
Because I write for The Guardian, that's probably a good example. I don't write for them very often, but if I get a really, what I think is a very clever, genius idea about... a trend in film or something, it will just pop into my head, and I'll suddenly, it's generally a feminist trend, let's face it, and it'll something pop into my head and I'll go, oh gosh, that's a real connection there between those films. And the old journalistic adage, if it's 3 times, it's a trend. So if you've got 3, then you go, okay, this is maybe a thing. So then I'll pitch my editors and they'll say yes or no. Usually yes, I'm happy to say.
Yeah.
But the rest of the time, in terms of ideas, it's very much based on what's coming out. So I look on the Launching Films website, which is the FDA's website, Film Distributors Association website, see what's coming up. And I think this is a disappointing thing sometimes for young filmmakers to hear, unfortunately, is that I don't get to write about stuff that hasn't been released yet or may not get released in the UK, because it is almost always about things that have a secured release date that are coming out soon that the readers can watch. So it does make it harder to support emerging filmmakers, but that's another reason that I like doing Girls on Film, because we are more able to support emerging filmmakers, even though we do tend to have episodes around the release so that our listeners can actually see the films. And also we the way we monetize is to work in partnership with distributors as well, and that's with films that we love, and I'm happy to say that more and more great films about women are being made, the more people we're able to work with, because we say, look, we love your movie, let's do something.
Yeah, and for teenagers that are wanting to get into film journalism or are thinking, oh, I want to write about film or I want to make videos about film, what tips could you give them for if they're having a block of ideas?
What, in terms of how to get work or in terms of how to get ideas?
I guess both. So how to think of things and then how to get yourself out there with these things, and the combination of standing out.
Yeah. Well, I think looking out for trends and being ahead of the game, I would say read all the industry, websites and magazines if possible, because then you're ahead of what's going to come out. And you know something is in production, then you can really start planning ahead and thinking, okay, well, as soon as that's got a release date in the UK, then I can start pitching editors, and this might be the first pitch they've had of this ilk. You don't want to suddenly go, oh, this is a trend, 2 months after the film's come out. You try and get ahead, read all you can, read the industry insider stuff. And I think quite a lot of young people don't do that, but I think it would be a good idea if you want to have the edge. In terms of being a film critic, I will have to say that it is extremely hard to get into film criticism now, even more so than when I did, because a lot of publications try to get away without paying you these days. Really important not to work for free. That's a really important message. Easier said than done, obviously. I mean, I would say you could do a couple of pieces to show willing and to show your worth, but then make sure you're being paid. If you want to be a freelance film critic, that is how you pay your bills. So, and what I found worked for me, which I'm sure would still one of the best things you can do is be persistent, knock on all the doors, and just work all the hours. You know, if it's your dream, someone's got to make it. You know, I mean, not many people are making a living out of film criticism these days, but touch wood, I'm fortunate enough to at the moment, and I don't know if that will last forever. But you know, I've worked really, really hard and not given up. And it is a labour of love, but when you actually get paid for what you love doing, it's incredible.
Yeah. How have you seen the industry change, like, over your career? Like, how is it different now, and how is it changing now?
Well, I think in terms of the industry itself, obviously we've had a really rough few years, you know, with the strikes, with COVID having a massive impact on film production, and people, as I'm sure many listeners will be well aware, their studies being interrupted by the lockdown and all that kind of thing. So it really has affected the industry. But having said that, you know, I was just at the British Independent Film Awards the other night. So many incredible films nominated, so many amazing filmmakers. There's talent to spare. There's so many wonderful people out there making great movies. But I would say one of the biggest shifts that I have seen is exactly what we talk about on Girls on Film, is, you know, it's representation on screen and becoming more aware of the influence of film. Something that, you know, Gina Davis has been doing for many years. You know, they say if she can see it, she can be it. And that's, to me, it's one of the most important messages. And one of the really exciting things about the way that film is changing, and the way that movements like Time's Up and Black Lives Matter are impacting the world of entertainment.
With representation, I think an additional part of that conversation, which I'm really interested by, is I think the initial wave was, this is why representation is important, and this is what we can do. But then the other side of it is viewpoints, or like, as in who's making that film, right? Who, I know this came up with Poor Things as well. It's like, okay, you've got great representation of women on screen, but then there's this new discussion of, but does that then need to be made by a woman? And I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that. And it applies to other film and genres as well, whether that's like race or ethnicity, whether that comes into whether you should make a film or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such an interesting discussion. And obviously, I mean, it's twofold. I think, you know, we need more people from all backgrounds in the driving seat in film to tell their own stories from their perspective. But at the same time, obviously, we can't start banning men from making films about women, or someone who hasn't got a disability making a film about someone who has got a disability potentially. You know, it's a tricky area, but I think it's just, again, it's being really aware of it and talking about it. At the Girls on Film Awards, we have an award that's always sponsored by the IMDb, and it's for the best ally. So it's for a male director who's made a great film, you know, about the female experience, and you know, and that's we're all in it together. And it's I think it's important to be as inclusive as possible. It's not necessarily who's telling it, it's how they're telling it, but also who they're choosing to work with. I mean, if you don't represent the group that you're going to be representing on screen, you better do a lot of homework and work with a lot of people who do come from that area. Otherwise, you're really in danger then, I think, you know, of not doing a subject matter justice. But I think, again, you know, places like the British Film Institute are very aware of that kind of thing now, and, you know, in terms of diversity, in terms of who's you know, what proportion of the crew is made up of, you know, what people, and even at the Oscars now, the Academy, they're getting more on the case with that. So I think, again, I think progress is slowly being made.
We're going to move on to our last couple of questions.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Give it to me.
So we ask this of all our guests. We ask them, what were they doing during their teenage years that maybe put you in a good place or a good position for what you do now. And we're going to also ask what advice you would give to that teenage self if you could travel back in time.
I would definitely, with regards to what I was doing then, say I was listening to a lot of radio. I had my own amateur radio show, which I used to record at home.
Nice.
Hardly anyone listened to it, possibly my family. My sister encouraged
Where
me.
was it being broadcast?
On cassette. Do I need to explain to your
Holy
listeners
moly.
what that is?
Maybe.
It's a recording device that you have privately. You're not broadcasting it anywhere.
Did you record both sides?
Oh, yes. Make the
good.
most of it.
Yeah.
Were you the only? Was it you on your own, or did you have guests?
Well, my sister initially did it with me, but she's a few years older. So when she became more of a teenager than I was, like older, she was less interested in that. But I think I was doing it, from my adolescence for quite a few years of my teens. So I was DJing, I was playing music, I was interviewing my poor sister, pretending to be various people at certain points.
That's amazing.
And then just having lots of chat.
Yeah.
So that was good practice. And then I ended up doing work experience on BBC Radio Devon because I grew up partly in Exeter. So that was really vital for me, going into that station and seeing how things worked, seeing behind the scenes. So I would say those things. In terms of advice to my younger self, goes back to something that I said earlier, which is being yourself. And, the greatest gift you can give an audience or a reader, I think, is to show your own personality, because then people are much more likely to relate to you. And of course, it's hard to do that when you're starting out and you're less confident. But I think, I think just, I would say be yourself, but also keep at it. You're doing great.
I was just wondering what you were saying about having your sister pretend to be certain people. Did you ever get to interview someone that she pretended to be when she was younger?
No, I think I actually just got her to pose. We both sort of posed as phone-in people, so not famous people.
Okay, gotcha.
No, she wasn't an impressionist or anything. That would have been very impressive. But we did used to pretend to be like men and women, like on the phone, like in radio stations like talk radio, when people would phone in,
like advice, like agony aunt type of thing.
I'm trying to think now. I would love to find some of these old cassettes for you. It would be fascinating and so embarrassing listening. But it would be more like when they used to ask people's opinion or like a poll.
Sure.
And you get that now on talk radio, like, do you think it's a good idea to join the EU or whatever the question is. But it would be something probably much more sort of lighthearted. But all that was great fun, and I think it. And also, I actually did. I used to play the flute in assembly at school, and I think that got me used to being on stage. So that was helpful too.
Yeah. Is it similar to being on stage, would you say, being like on air or being on a podcast?
No, because you can see your audience on stage. That's stating the obvious, but I think... And that can be good or bad. I don't know if you've ever sat on the stage and you've seen someone look at their phone or look really bored and you think, I can see you. Somehow people don't think that you can see them talking to their friend or saying something that looks like it might be a bit snide about you. I literally can see you. But what I'm happy to say is when it goes right, which is most of the time, to see their happy smiling faces and their laughter and their encouragement, particularly when we do Live Girls on Film episodes, just really boosts me, and it makes the experience better, and it makes the recording better. And you just like sitting here, like I can see your faces on the video here now, and that's really helpful because we're interacting and seeing each other, isn't it? So I think and then I'm sure the listeners listening can hopefully hear that difference.
I've got this image in my head though of you sort of doing live TV, and you sort of make a joke and you just don't know if it landed with the nation.
It is it's quite different. I mean, I like being on TV with a presenter, but when I was doing the BBC News Channel film review in lockdown, I was presenting directly to my mobile phone, which was then being filmed and then sent off to an editor. So it's extraordinary that millions of people were watching something that was filmed on my mobile phone. it was, I have to say, it was better when my dear husband would take an hour or two off work and come and film it for me. Because then, I was really able to see his reaction. I was able to go, oh, wow, okay. He gets it, or he's like, no, go again with that one. Just be really honest. Yeah. So it's good. Yeah.
Amazing. What a weird time that was.
So weird.
But it's given us, I feel like, podcasts even bigger because of it. Everything, loads of amazing things have come out of it to some degree. And
yeah, I mean, we thrived in lockdown because there was nothing else to do. So we just threw ourselves, myself and, Hedda Archbold, who launched Girls on Film with me, we threw ourselves into it and it sort of expanded. So, yeah.
Well, we're big fans, so we can't wait to continue listening. If you ever need a girl on film, I do have long enough hair, I think, just about.
Excellent. Keep making those great films about women and we'll talk.
Ellen might be available as well.
Yes, maybe.
Excellent. Let's keep talking.
My hair's not quite Dan's, but...
thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a treat.
Thank you so much,
I've
Anna.
really enjoyed it. Thank you both so much. So nice to speak to you.
That was wonderful.
That was so interesting. And
we were in the presence of a master, though, weren't we?
Yeah, we really were.
Brought its own level of
feeling
terror.
Slightly starstruck in my sort of specific feminist filmy way.
yeah, and your verbal poddery, feministic self.
Yeah,
it was sort of an icon of all these branches of Ellenhood and of Leeds.
Yeah, honestly,
an icon of Leeds.
But yeah, that was so good. Everything she said about like the direction of film now and like where film journalism comes into that in terms of representation and hope.
Yeah. I feel like we had some heavy questions for the Young Film Academy podcast.
Yeah.
For a change, but it's like I feel like that is such a big part of how we perceive films now, and these are the lenses through which we analyse films. There's a reason that YFA does the whole Focus on Females program to bolster women that are trying to join the industry. There is a reason that's happening because that is the zeitgeist, and I think it would have been wrong of us almost to not go into that, to not ask someone that obviously has to consider these things and the landscape within which films are released on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it's important to have these conversations in a more relaxed way and not to shy away from them and just to approach like wokeness just more openly and because everyone's talking about it, so we should talk about it too.
And my preachy advice to listeners is, I know there's lots of people on different sides of things. If you're someone that is angered by the concept of wokeness, I would say try to ignore the concept of wokeness and just take everything on a case-by-case basis and just be like, okay, what is actually the aim of this thing that I'm reading about? You can easily be like, oh, that's just woke
nonsense,
ideology or wokeness. It's like, but what are they actually trying to achieve with this? What are you actually annoyed about? And often you'll see some real consideration and kindness at the centre of this request, and try and be your own self-critical person. Just be like, do I agree with this action taken to help this group or the aims of whatever this objective is that's trying to be achieved? And I'd say 80% of the time, 90% of the time, most people will agree with the intentions and the means by which they're trying to achieve it.
That's like what Anna said, to replace the term woke with empathy and see where that gets you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know what struck me though is, I think what this interview completely undid is, the phrase is those that can't do teach, right? But I was like, people that are critics rather than filmmakers is complete nonsense. Being a critic is such like a craft, an art, and a challenge in and of itself. And I think Anna really got across how tricky it is to break into that as one aspect of film, and it's just a different side of the same industry.
And I also think film journalism and criticism, it's a bridge between like the audience and the filmmakers. And so you're actually sort of closer to the audience and the, I like quote unquote normal people when you're a journalist, because you're connecting people with the film and you're understanding all of that. So it's a really important job, and it's really requires you to know a lot about film.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are interested in being a film critic, we hope this has been very useful. Make sure you check out the Girls on Film podcast, which will be available on all platforms, and you can hear Anna discuss in even more depth all these things and specific movies, and chat with amazing industry people, similar to what we do here.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a question.
Oh yeah?
This is a question from Isabel. Isabel wants to know, how do I develop my writing skills so that I can write movie reviews? What are your thoughts, Ellen?
My thoughts are thinking about Anna doing recordings with her sister in her bedroom. Mm-hmm. And that's all about practicing and just writing as much as you can. It doesn't matter if it's good, it doesn't matter what it is, but if you have an idea, write it down, run with it. Try not to edit it, and then go back afterwards, and just to funnel stuff out as much as you can.
Absolutely. Never edit. We don't edit these episodes. Someone's actually playing the theme tune live.
Yeah, we just...
every episode.
We just funnel it out.
In fact, someone's playing it right now.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Ellen, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a real treat.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, make sure you send us your questions, guys, to podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk, and we will answer your question on a relevant future episode. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.